I used to think self-love was just another fluffy self-help buzzword, like drinking green juice or saying affirmations in the mirror. I love myself, I'd mumble while brushing my teeth, hoping that somehow, magically, I'd start believing it. Spoiler alert, it didn't work. Then one day, my 6-year-old niece asked me a question that stopped me cold. She tugged on my sleeve and said, "Do you like yourself? Like myself?" I wanted to say, of course, I'm a grown-up, I pay bills, I eat vegetables. But the truth was, I wasn't sure. And here's what I've learned since then. If we don't love ourselves, not in a self-absorbed, look how wonderful I am way, then loving others fully becomes almost impossible. Why? Because we can't pour from an empty cup. We can't offer what we don't believe we deserve. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about why loving yourself isn't selfish. It's necessary. You know how flight attendants always say, put your oxygen mask on first before helping others? The first time I really listened to that, I remember thinking, well, that's selfish. I mean, shouldn't we help other people first? Shouldn't we make sure they're okay before we take care of ourselves? But here's the thing. Have you ever tried helping someone else when you're running on empty? It's not pretty. You don't show up as your best self. You're short-tempered, drained, maybe even a little resentful, and eventually you burn out. Because love, real, deep, sustainable love, doesn't come from sacrifice alone. It comes from wholeness. And wholeness starts with loving yourself first. I learned this the hard way. Years ago, I prided myself on being the go-to person. Need help moving? I'm there. Need someone to vent to at midnight? Call me. Need someone to take care of your dog while you go on vacation? Of course. Did I have time? Nope. Did I desperately need a break? Oh, absolutely. But I kept saying yes because I thought that's what being a good person meant. Then one day, after yet another, sure, I can do that moment, I found myself crying in my car over something ridiculous, like dropping my coffee or forgetting my keys. But it wasn't about the coffee or the keys. It was about the fact that I was exhausted, stretched so thin I barely recognized myself. And what scared me most? I was starting to resent the very people I loved, not because they had done anything wrong, but because I had convinced myself that my love had to come at the expense of my own well-being. That was my wake-up call, because here's the truth. You can't pour from an empty cup. You can't love others well if you don't love yourself first. And before you say, that sounds selfish, let's break this down. If a friend came to you exhausted, overwhelmed, and on the verge of burnout, what would you say? Would you tell them, keep pushing, keep giving? Who cares if you're drowning? No, you'd tell them to slow down, to take care of themselves, to rest. But for some reason, when it comes to ourselves, we believe the rules are different. We believe that if we just give a little more, stretch a little further, push past the exhaustion, we'll finally feel enough. But love, true love, isn't about depleting ourselves. It's about filling up so we can give from a place of abundance. Think about the people in your life who love you well. What do they all have in common? I'll tell you, they have a sense of self-worth. They know their limits. They know how to rest, how to set boundaries, how to recharge, so that when they show up for you, they show up fully. Because love without boundaries isn't love, it's exhaustion. So what does this look like in real life? It looks like saying no when your plate is already full, without guilt. It looks like taking time to do things that bring you joy, not just the things that keep everyone else happy. It looks like letting go of the belief that love means always putting others first. And if this feels uncomfortable, if a little voice in your head is saying, but isn't this selfish? I want you to challenge that thought. Because loving yourself doesn't mean only thinking about yourself. It means making sure that you're whole enough to truly be there for others. The people in your life don't need a worn out, exhausted, resentful version of you. They need the version of you that's full, present, and capable of giving real, wholehearted love. And that starts with putting your own oxygen mask on first. Imagine this, your best friend calls you and says, I feel like I'm failing, I don't think I'm good enough. What do you say? Do you say, yeah, you're right, you're kind of a disaster? No, you don't. And if you do, we need to have a very different conversation. You'd probably say something like, oh, stop, you're doing your best, you're human, you're allowed to mess up. You'd remind them of their strengths. You tell them they are loved, not because they're perfect, but because they're them. Now, let's flip the script. When you mess up, when you're struggling, what does that little voice in your head say? For most of us, it's not kind. It says things like, why can't you get it together? Everyone else is handling life better than you. You should be doing more. You're not enough. And here's the kicker. If someone else talked to us like that, we'd drop them from our lives so fast they'd get whiplash. But when it's us, we accept it as truth. We let that voice run the show, deciding what we deserve, how we show up, and whether or not we believe we're worthy of love, not just from others, but from ourselves. I call this the inner critic versus best friend test. If you wouldn't say it to someone you love, why on earth would you say it to yourself? I used to think my inner critic was just holding me accountable, pushing me to be better. But there's a big difference between growth and growth sounds like you're learning, you'll do better next time. Shame sounds like you're a failure, you always mess up. And shame doesn't lead to transformation, it leads to hiding. It leads to second guessing yourself, shrinking, avoiding risks, and believing that if people really knew you, they'd walk away. I know this because I've been there. Years ago, I made a mistake. Of awful, stomach-dropping mistakes that keeps you up at night, replaying every detail. And instead of saying, okay, I messed up, I'll learn from it. I'll let my inner critic take over. You're a screw up, you'll never get this right. I carry that shame around like a heavy backpack, convinced that if I punish myself enough, I'd somehow fix it. But you know what self-criticism never does? It never heals. It never moves us forward. What does? Self-compassion. Now, I know some people hear self-compassion and immediately think, oh great, so I'm just supposed to let myself off the hook. But self-compassion isn't about ignoring mistakes. It's about treating yourself with the same grace and kindness you'd give someone you love. Research shows that people who practice self-compassion aren't less accountable, they're actually more likely to take responsibility for their actions. Because when we believe we're worthy, even when we mess up, we don't have to hide, we don't have to prove anything. We can own our mistakes, learn from them, and move forward. So here's my challenge. Pay attention to the way you talk to yourself. When you hear that inner critic creeping in, stop and ask, would I say this to my best friend? If the answer is no, then maybe, just maybe, you shouldn't say it to yourself either. Because the way we talk to ourselves, that's the foundation for the way we show up in the world. And if we want to love others well, we have to start by loving ourselves first. We love a good finish line, don't we? We want that moment where we cross over, arms raised in victory, and say, I did it. I love myself. No more insecurity, no more doubt, just pure, unwavering self-acceptance from here on out. But here's the thing. Self-love isn't a destination. It's not a box you check off or a goal you reach once and never have to think about again. It's a daily practice, a choice you make over and over, especially on the days when it feels impossible. I used to believe that if I just did enough work, read enough books, went to enough therapy sessions, meditated enough, I'd arrive at this magical place where I would just be confident. No more negative thoughts, no more struggles, just an endless well of self-love. But the truth is, self-love is a lot like brushing your teeth. You don't just do it once and call it good. You have to keep showing up for yourself every single day, or things start to get messy. Some days, self-love looks like setting boundaries. Say no when every part of you wants to say yes just to make someone else happy. Other days it looks like resting, not because you earned it, but because you deserve it. And sometimes, self-love is as simple as looking in the mirror and choosing, just for that day, just for that moment, not to say something cruel to yourself. There was a time when I thought loving myself meant feeling good all the time, that if I was doing it right, I'd never have moments of doubt or insecurity. But I've learned that self-love isn't about never struggling. It's about how you show up for yourself when you struggle. I'll be honest, there are still days when I wake up and don't feel particularly kind toward myself. Days when my inner critic gets loud, when I second guess everything, when I don't feel worthy. But I've learned that those are the days when self-love matters most. Because self-love isn't about perfection, it's about commitment. It's about saying, even when I don't feel like I deserve kindness, I'm going to choose it anyway. We tend to think love is something we earn, that we have to prove we're worthy of it. But the most powerful kind of love, the kind that changes us, it's the love that shows up even when we don't feel deserving. It's the kind of love we give to our kids, our best friends, our partners. The love that says, you don't have to be perfect for me to love you. And if we can offer that to others, why can't we offer it to ourselves? So if you're waiting for some magical day when self-love just clicks into place and stays there forever, I hate to break it to you, it doesn't work that way. But here's the good news. You don't have to be perfect at this. You just have to keep showing up, keep choosing kindness, keep giving yourself grace. Because self-love isn't a finish line, it's a practice. And the more you practice, the more natural it becomes. Have you ever noticed that when you're feeling good, like really good, you're more patient with people? You hold the door open for strangers, you let the person with 2 items cut in front of you at the grocery store. You don't immediately assume the guy who cut you off in traffic is a terrible human being. And then there are the days when you're running on fumes. Maybe you didn't sleep well, maybe work has been a mess, maybe life just feels like a lot. And on those days, everything irritates you. The way someone chews too loudly, the email that doesn't have an exclamation point and now feels aggressive, the barista who took 3 extra seconds to hand you your coffee. What's the difference? It's not the world. It's not the people around you. It's you. It's the way you feel about yourself, the way you're experiencing you in that moment. Because how we treat ourselves, whether we offer ourselves grace or judgment, kindness or criticism, shapes how we show up for everyone else. It took me a long time to realize that love is a mirror, that the way I saw myself, the way I talked to myself, the way I treated myself, it all reflected outward. And when I was running on shame, when I was beating myself up for every little thing, when I believed I wasn't enough, that belief didn't stay locked inside of me. It seeped out into my relationships, into my work, into the way I showed up in the world. There was a season in my life when I was constantly tearing myself down. Every mistake I made felt like proof that I wasn't good enough. And when I looked at other people, friends, co-workers, even strangers, I found myself being critical, judgmental, not because I wanted to be, but because I had so little compassion for myself that I didn't know how to extend it to anyone else. But the opposite is also true. The more we practice self-compassion, the more we can offer it to the world. The more we believe we are worthy, the easier it is to see the worth in others. The more kindness we give ourselves, the more we create space for kindness in our relationships. Think about the people in your life who make you feel safe. The ones who don't make you feel like you have to earn their love. The ones who don't keep score, who don't expect perfection, who don't make you feel like you have to prove your worth. I'd bet that those people, they love themselves well. Not in a self-absorbed way, not in a me-first way, but in a way that says, I know who I am, and because I know who I am, I can love you without fear, without judgment, without conditions. Because that's what real love is. It's not something we squeeze out of ourselves when we're empty. It's not something we manufacture when we're running on shame. It's something we give freely when we already believe we are enough. So if you've ever wondered why loving yourself matters, why it's not just some fluffy self-help idea, this is why. Because love starts with us. It starts with the way we speak to ourselves, the way we hold space for our own mistakes, the way we extend the kind of grace we so easily offer to everyone else. Because the way you love yourself, that's the foundation for how you love the world. Let's be honest, vulnerability gets a bad rap. We're told to be strong, to toughen up, to not let things get to us. And for a long time, I believed that. I thought being strong meant keeping my guard up, never letting anyone see the messy, imperfect, struggling parts of me. But here's what I've learned. Love, the deep, meaningful, life-changing kind, can't exist without vulnerability. Because real love isn't about showing up as the perfectly polished version of ourselves. It's about showing up as we really are. And that's scary. I used to think that if I could just work hard enough, fix enough things about myself, then I'd finally be ready for love, ready to be fully seen, ready to let people in without fear. But the truth is, waiting until you feel ready is just another way of avoiding risk. And love, whether it's love for yourself or love for others, always involves risk. Because love isn't safe. It asks us to be honest. It asks us to be seen. It asks us to say, here I am, flaws and all, and I hope you'll stay. And that's hard, especially when we've been hurt before, when we've been rejected, judged, or made to feel like we weren't enough. It's easy to build walls to convince ourselves that if we just stay guarded, we won't get hurt again. But here's the problem. The same walls that keep out pain also keep out connection. And without connection, there is no love. I've been in rooms full of people and still felt completely alone, not because they didn't care, but because I wasn't willing to let them see me. And I've had moments where I've risked showing up fully, risked saying the thing I was scared to say, and even though it was terrifying, I felt more loved than ever before. Because love, real love, requires us to be seen. Not just the curated version of ourselves, not just the parts we think are acceptable, but the whole complicated, imperfect, messy truth of who we are. That includes loving yourself enough to be honest about what you need. It means admitting when you're struggling. It means letting people support you instead of always being the one who carries everything on your own. It's easy to think that love is something we give to others, something external. But the kind of love that lasts, the kind that heals, starts inside. It starts with being vulnerable enough to say, I deserve kindness, too. I deserve grace, too. I am worthy of love, too. Because when you believe that, when you really, truly believe that, you start loving differently. You start loving without fear. You stop keeping score, stop holding back, stop waiting for some perfect version of yourself to arrive before you let people in. You realize that the people who love you want the real you, not the version of you that's always strong, always put together, always fine. They want you. And that's the challenge, isn't it? To believe we are worthy of love, not in spite of our flaws, but including them. To show up even when it feels risky. To trust that love isn't about perfection, it's about presence. So here's my invitation to you. Take the risk. Let yourself be seen. Love yourself enough to show up fully, because love at its core is about connection. And connection can only happen when we're willing to be real. So here's the challenge. Start with you. Start with the way you talk to yourself, the way you hold space for your own imperfections, the way you choose, day after day, to show up with kindness, not just for others, but for you. Because the love you give yourself, that's the love you carry into the world, and the world needs more of that. So be gentle, be kind, keep practicing, and remember, you are already worthy of the love you so freely give to others. Good luck on this journey, and from the bottom of my heart, thank you. Thank you for showing up, for listening, for being willing to do this work. It matters. You matter.